I'm Eva Oh, and this is the Teakink podcast. I've been a dominatrix since 2011, and I would like to spill the tea on my life. Thank you for listening.
Welcome to another episode of the Teakink podcast, this time with Megan Prescott. Is that what we're going by?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Do we have any other aliases?
Megatron, or whenever I'm asked by people I don't want to tell my name is Molly Thomas, because that's the name in my show. So,
Oh, okay. In which show?
that's so I took a show to the Edinburgh Fringe last year, and it's like my first solo show.
Okay.
So yeah, the character's name is Molly Thomas, so that's my alter ego now.
That's what they get to look up. Have you got the Instagram?
No, I should. I should make her a whole. I feel like she's quite a unbearable person, so I'd like to make an unbearable Instagram for her.
So how did Molly come about?
Molly is essentially an amalgamation of a lot of my own life experiences as both an actor, a child actor, and a sex worker, but also she intertwines a lot of things that either my friends have gone through and have given me consent to talk about, or things that we've heard about publicly in the media about things that have happened in the industry, or news stories that involve women. She is just kind of the pinnacle, a really good microcosm of issues that face women in general in a patriarchy.
So what kind of issues?
There was a version of the play where if we had more than an hour, I would have loved to get into that part of it as well. But she is a child star, and I was not a star, but I had experience in child acting. And looking back on it, it was pre-Me Too. So the industry was not what it should have been. It still isn't perfect, but it was bad. And I only had a taste of that industry when I was 16. But I look at these kids, especially in America, in Hollywood, where they're starting at 6, and they have lived that life, and they haven't even really chosen it. It's their parents that have chosen it. And, one of the things that people would always bring up when I was getting into sex worker rights were, it's exploiting people, sex work is exploitation. And I was like, no, capitalism is quite exploitative, and there's lots of jobs that I've done particularly that are very exploitative. I've actually felt the least exploited when I did sex work. But acting, if we're going to talk about, and child acting, if we're going to talk about exploitation, that's the only industry, as far as I know, where it's legal to have child labor. I think I know there are strict rules around it, but I'm okay, so there's an issue there, youth and sexuality being exploited from as young as possible in the acting industry. Then there's also, a version of the play where she has a boyfriend, who has a lot of money, and she meets him while she's stripping, and his kind of vibe is, you can live with me, you don't need to pay rent, and I'll give you some money every week, but I don't want you to go back to stripping, because under the guise of I don't think it's safe, I want you to be safe, so I'll give you the money that you would have earned. And she thinks that's a great deal because she doesn't know any other sex workers. Whereas if she had community and she knew other sex workers, they would be £100 a week, and free rent is not a deal. But the point with that being there are lots of transactional relationships.
Yes.
Marriage is often hugely transactional, and I'm not against that, but let's call it what it is.
Yeah.
How come when the woman is the main benefactor of those transactions, we have a problem with it? So Molly and her story is supposed to highlight with using these extreme,
And how do you feel about your career in acting as a child now?
I look back on it kind of I was thrown in at the deep end. I don't have a relationship with my parents, and there's some issues with family. So I didn't have the support and the backing, which I think child actors should have. When we were old enough to not legally need chaperones. So it was kind of that sweet spot where you're able to work, but you don't need a chaperone. The law's changed now. I think you now have to be 18 before you don't need a chaperone. But yeah, we were like thrown at the deep end of the industry. I hadn't been to drama school. I hadn't even been to uni. That was kind of like my learning experience. And luckily, we learned to swim. But I do think like that's no thanks to anybody. Like, luckily, we happened to learn to swim. But there are lots of people that you see stories about that get chucked into the deep end of that, and they don't learn to swim because it's, you know, the industry it could be a horrible, horrible place if you don't have the people around you and like the support that you need. I had my twin sister with me for all of the jobs I did around that age. And I credit her and our relationship a lot for my sanity. I really think having some type of family support there really saved us. But there are a lot of child actors that don't. And yeah, now I just look back and I'm like, you know, the show was a lot about teens letting loose, drinking, having sex, whatever. But I think every show at that time, there was no intimacy coordinators. There was no Me Too movement. So I think even though our show really was like highlighted the sex and drugs and whatever, I think people weren't safeguarded properly in that industry altogether in that era. And I think now we would be foolish for thinking, oh, it's fixed now. We've had Me Too. It's fixed. Now it just has to be more subtle. Like, you can't overtly abuse someone in the industry now, but I think it's still happening.
Do you think that child acting should be limited in some way?
I think if you can hire an adult who looks like a child, hire an adult who looks like a child for everyone's benefit. You don't want to work with a child. I would never want to work with a teenager if I was a director or a producer. If I could hire an adult who looked young, just do that. They are going to be more experienced. You're less likely to traumatize them. They are more likely to know their own boundaries. So they know in the moment, I don't want that to do that. I'm not comfortable with that. They can advocate for themselves. But actually, I think sometimes the reason people like, not necessarily younger, but more naive, hiring more naive people is because you can kind of more easily push boundaries. And they're usually easier to work with, which translates to
taking advantage of.
Yeah.
So you've also moved through different occupations throughout your life, but at this point, how would you describe what it is that you do in order to put the roofs over our heads?
Yeah, this is the thing. The thing that pays my bills is OnlyFans, and it has for, what are we, 2025? 5 years now.
Nice, congrats.
Before that, it was, after I did this big acting job when I was like 16, it was very weird. My sister went to LA, worked very hard, and she deserves every bit of success that she's had. I had a bit of a personal crisis and didn't know what I wanted to do or whether I even could do acting. So that didn't translate to getting many acting jobs. I still thought I really wanted to do it. This was before I was diagnosed as autistic, so I didn't know myself at all. So I had part-time jobs to try and pay the bills while I was still auditioning. I wasn't getting any acting work. I was working in pubs I worked in pubs for 3 years, nannying. I was a security guard for a while. And just every book every job.
Does that require a qualification? Security guard? We awake.
Have eyes and look. And I had a friend who was, she is a dancer and she has been stripping since she was 18. She's like a veteran. And she was like, you are insane you need to start stripping. You are working yourself silly 7 days a week and you're making minimum wage. You're never going to be able to do acting if you're always, cleaning up sick after people, So I started stripping and I think some people think that it's immediate, oh, you're rich, thousands of, it's hard and I wasn't good at it. I'm not good at it.
What makes a good stripper and why was that not you?
Well, it's also why I probably wasn't doing well at acting because I was like, I'm not very good at pretending to feel a way that I don't feel. So I was like, these people were talking to me and I was not interested. And I was like, I okay, like, what's happening here? Are we going for a dance or what? And that they don't like being reminded that I'm not there because I actually like them. And that doesn't make a very good stripper. But I was still making about the same in 3 days' work that I was in 7.
Okay.
So for me, it was perfect. And I could still audition in the day because it's a night job. So that worked really well.
There are lunch shifts at dance clubs.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah.
Day shifts.
Buffet. Maybe that's more of an American thing, but yeah.
But yeah, so I did that for, I think, a year or so. Then I met a guy who was like, I don't really feel comfortable with you working. I'm worried about your safety.
There's £100 a week.
Yeah, and I was like, oh, thanks. Like, what a great deal I'm getting.
Oh, Molly.
Yeah, and yeah. Then I went to LA to try and write and act, and ran out of money because the type of visa I was on, you could only work in the 2 industries that you applied for. So acting and writing, and you know,
it's hard.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, it's really expensive to live in America. Like, if you get sick, I had an allergic reaction to some makeup. It cost me $700.
Yeah.
So ran out of money, came back, had no money whatsoever. My amazing friend Clarissa let me live in her spare room. And for a few years, I was just, again, back to like minimum wage jobs. I was like, oh, I can't go back to stripping because I tried. I went back and I was like, there's no money. Like, it's so hard in London to make money as a stripper. You have to be very, very fucking good and work very hard. And I just wasn't good enough. And my friend, the same friend, was like, when the pandemic hit, she was like, I'm not being funny, but if you started an OnlyFans page, you've got old men wanking over you from Skins anyway. Why are you not
making money?
You're not getting any royalties from it. Why aren't you making money? So again,
Can you imagine?
Listen to my friend.
The royalties. Every time somebody jerks off to a photo of you.
Yeah. Yeah, I should. There's websites dedicated to, if you want to find an actor, all their nude scenes, all their sex scenes, there's a website that's dedicated to it. So I was like, these things exist. I just don't run it. Like, it's very upsetting. So yeah, and we don't get any residuals from Netflix, which the show that I was on is often trending on Netflix. But because Netflix didn't exist when I was in the show,
couldn't write it into the contract.
Yeah, so it's very upsetting. Yeah. But yeah, so I started an OnlyFans page in, I think, March 2020.
Yeah, that stuff should be able to retroactively.
Yeah.
Depends on the lawyer, I guess, at the time.
And I feel like maybe the unions could do it, but I think, but that was the legal climate at the time. And it was my way of making my own royalties back for what I felt like I should have got in the first place. And it completely changed my life. Luckily, I had a big following on social media already, which is another thing that if you don't already have that, it's very hard to build it on OnlyFans because there's really bad discoverability. But
there's no discoverability.
There's no discoverability. It's such a weird system. Oversight, I think. I feel like there could be such a huge opportunity for OnlyFans themselves to make more money. But I started that, and again, it didn't make me a millionaire, but it paid my rent. I could afford to rent an actual flat rather than just sleep on friends' sofas, and it changed my life. And also, it meant that I was able, ironically, to do acting and writing and not be so stressed all the time about money. And I started getting acting and writing work. Ironically, to be creative.
Headspace.
Yeah.
And so you have this note from your friend to think about OnlyFans. What did that process look like for you?
A lot of it was addressing or realizing that I had a lot of internalized shame about sex work and about nudity. And even a lot of people have OnlyFans. It's not all explicit content. Some people don't do explicit content. The beauty of it is you can do what you want, right? But when you say OnlyFans, people assume explicit, right? Which
mine is, by the way.
the good ones are explicit. But I found it funny that there are so many people, including myself originally, who was like, but even if I say OnlyFans, you know, producers and agents and, you know, all these big important gatekeepers are going to think that I do explicit stuff, and then what's that going to mean for my career? And I was like, wait, I've been on television as a 16-year-old imitating sex, nearly naked, like at 16. So if that was fine, and this is fine. This is fine. I want to do this. I want to show as much as I'm comfortable showing. And I have never done anything that I didn't feel comfortable doing. I've been spoken to with much more respect on OnlyFans than I ever have on Instagram, because I find that when people pay for something, they understand it's valuable. And so they respect it much more.
Stupid, but yes.
Yeah. I have only ever received, I think, 2 unsolicited dick pics on OnlyFans. And I have received many on Instagram before they actually did
Blurred
something
them.
about it. Yeah, it gets blurred now. So, but
Love the delete all button. I'm sure I miss a lot of good stuff too, but it is very satisfying.
No, don't need that in your headspace. But yeah, so it was accepting I think I have like shame around nudity, sexuality, and then talking to my therapist about it. And it almost felt like it wasn't mine to use. And I think that might have been because from very young, a lot of women have this, where we're kind of taught that your sexuality doesn't belong to you. It's not for you to enjoy or use for your gain. So it was a lot of like self-work. But to be honest, as soon as I did it, pressed the button, and people started subscribing, and the relief that came with knowing like, oh, I can pay my rent and I can afford to buy food each week this month. I was like, oh, you know what? Acting's never done that. You know, like money talks, and a lot of acting and writing is doing unpaid work. And it's really exclusionary for that very reason. You need to do a lot of the work up front and hope one day you get paid. Whereas I don't send anyone any customs, anything, unless they pay first. Like, and it really was a journey of accepting that I am a sexual being, accepting that I deserve to be paid for my labor, and accepting that my labor is valuable. And now going back into acting and writing and other creative freelance work, I'm not willing to put up with the exploitative stuff I was before. Like, I'm not doing work for free. I'm not, like, if the DOP is being paid, then the actors need to be paid, then the writers need to be paid. Like, there's no more like, yeah, the actors, there's dozens of them. Like, anyone would do it if you don't. Fine. Have them. If you want me, this is the price. Like,
why do you think, so ever since I've been working in the industry for almost 15 years, the sex industry, and it has also really transformed the way that I see, I always get this wrong. Is it remuneration or remuneration?
oh,
Getting paid.
yeah, I don't know actually.
And like
Just mumble it.
The nature of transactions. Is that what actors do? And now it's changed everything so that when people ask for money up front, like a restaurant or whatever is super fancy or something like this, I understand that that's the way that it is, right? And I also demand certain states that are not common. Why do you think the understanding that, you know, my labor is valuable is something that exists very naturally in sex work? Why do you think that's something that doesn't exist in acting, for example?
I think about this a lot, and I think it is something, there's a lot of classism in the hierarchy of what we consider more or less acceptable in terms of work or types of sex work. And I just think, surely acting is just another level on that. If we're acting in sex scenes, but because acting is quite, I didn't go to drama school, but it's rare that you can get into acting if you haven't been to drama school. Drama school is like
expensive.
I don't even know. I think it's like 30 grand or something, and I don't think you can get a student loan for it. And there's like 1 or 2 scholarships a year. but it's quite a difficult and expensive industry to get into and maintain like afloat in. So I think something about that maybe makes people think, oh, well, it's like, that's classy and that's like a proper career, even though a lot of sex work involves a lot of acting. And it's, you know, a lot of, all acting is performative. And there's a lot of social things within both of them that require like, you know, an understanding and knowing people. But we just, it's how we like categorize work based on what we perceive to be like higher or lower class, I think. And I think another part of it is that we live in a society that teaches everybody that, like I said, women's sexuality isn't theirs to like enjoy. It's a valuable commodity. We are taught that, because if you give it away, you're valued less. So that's if they're saying, oh, you shouldn't make money off of it, but they're saying when you give it away, you're less valuable. But you're telling me it is valuable, because if I lose, So we are taught that it's a valuable commodity, sexuality, but we are also taught that men are owed it for free. This whole, you know, like sex education, I didn't have any because I went to like a Catholic school, but there's a lot of gaps in sex education, and it's kind of like sex is enjoyable for the man, and then you teach the woman like, you know, if you don't want to, like, keep it, like, which is great, but we don't teach women about pleasure. We don't teach them that sex is for them. So I'm hoping this changes with newer generations, but my generation, I feel like we're taught that sex was this thing for the man and it was your value, and that as soon as you start giving it away, you are less valuable. And I think there's just uproar when women, I know there are, you know, sex workers are not just women, it's all genders, but I think a lot of it comes from the fact that, women using their sexual labor and profiting off of it, when a lot of men subconsciously may think they are owed that for free. That's where this like disdain for it comes from, because they are doing something that is directly at odds with what you believe, even if you don't really know that you believe that. If you're angry at someone profiting off of sexual labor, bodily labor in terms of sex work, but you're not angry at like athletes or marriage, like you're not angry at transactional relationships or bodily labor. You're just angry that people are...
You're not profiting in the way that society has told you should be.
Yeah, and it's the same thing with, you know, Instagram banning, they say they're banning like sexual content, but there's a lot of stuff where celebrities will post things, but if someone that they know is a sex worker posts the same thing, even if it's nothing to do with sexuality, the sex worker's post will get banned and Kylie Jenner's won't. So and that will be because Kylie Jenner does ads on Instagram that they get a cut of, and they don't want to lose that. So it's not even that they don't want sexual content on their platform, because it's just come out that they were they were allowing sexual ads. It's just when they can't get a piece of the pie, the biggest piece of the pie, they don't like it.
Yeah, and it's also like the nature that Kylie Jenner is selling a very profitable and widespread commodity that you can franchise and operate in all of these very understood capitalistic spheres, whereas the nature of a relational sexual transaction, I think, is not easy to regulate and just doesn't really fit into their format of what their profit margin might be.
Yeah.
So you've done clearly a lot of work in terms of coming to understand these systems at play and your reaction and your relation to them. And now OnlyFans is supporting your life, and I'm very happy for you. And you've given yourself space to create more art for yourself as well. But you are also even involved in the organizational side of sex work. I think when we met, you were basically championing National Ugly Mugs.
Yeah. So I'm now the chair of the board of a charity called National Ugly Mugs, and they work to reduce all forms of violence against sex workers. I came across them years ago. It would have been like five years ago, around the time when I started OnlyFans, I think, because I was like, I knew I wanted to write something about sex work, but I wanted to make sure, I knew I had a very limited experience and a very privileged experience in that world. So I wanted to speak to an organization that do the type of work that National Ugly Mugs do. I spoke to them and they were like, you know, educated me. Like I needed the educating, like this is important. Like if we misrepresent sex work in another piece of media, it is a type of violence against sex workers because it supports the stigmatization of sex workers, which encourages violence, etc. So I was just following them and the work that they did ever since then. And I think I was just shocked that they need to exist because, again, from my privileged life and point of view, I had never questioned that if I was assaulted or if anything happened to me in sex work in everyday life, the police would do something about it. People would listen. People would believe me. Again, so privileged. But to hear that they started because reports about violence against sex workers to the police were not taken seriously and weren't followed through, I was just so grateful they existed, but also outraged that they had to.
Yeah. So National Ugly Mugs, for anyone watching who doesn't know, it's correct me if I'm wrong, but Ugly Mugs is this concept that's not only run here, but internationally, where we create a database of clients. So if there's anything that maybe they've done wrong, like they haven't paid correctly, they've physically assaulted somebody, however, it kind of goes into this space where we can cross-check to screen our clients before we want to step into a space with them. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. So I followed what they did. I worked with them where I could, and then I became a member of the board. I became the chair of the board in September, and I have been doing work to like speak. I said when I became the chair, I was like, no, I don't know how to do this. But one of my main roles is like the events and marketing for National Ugly Mugs, which to me, I was like, I seem so frivolous because it's such an important organization. But the more I see and the more I hear about how sex work is represented in the media, the more I'm like, it sucks. But if we don't get the like average Joe person to understand why this is so harmful, why stereotypical, incorrect portrayals of sex work in the media or on TV and film, why it's so damaging, then we are not going to be able to get politicians to listen, because politicians are only voting for what they think their constituents want. They're not voting out of the good of their heart. They don't care, right? But if we can show them, look, enough people understand that criminalizing sex work only increases the violence that predominantly women face, hopefully we can get it to a point where they vote for decriminalization, which is what all sex workers are advocating, almost all sex workers are advocating for. My job is to try and raise the general public's awareness of things that I would think are like common knowledge, but it's because I've been in it so long. Yeah, I forget that people actually don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know.
No,
for the longest time.
Yeah,
I had been even working within it, and because I started in a decriminalized environment, I was lucky. I was in New South Wales, Australia.
Oh, okay.
I felt the stigma.
Yeah,
because that doesn't go away even within a legal framework. But I didn't, I could work in a brothel. And I had a tax number, and everybody had like workplace health and safety posters.
Yeah.
There was systems. I could choose it on my tax return.
Yeah.
It just felt like an integrated part of life.
Yeah.
And only when I started to do some work with sex worker organizations did I understand the differences between a decriminalized environment and what that promotes. And for example, even being here in the UK in a legalized environment and what that oppresses us with. But what is the distinction?
Yeah, so decriminalization is the removal of sex work specific laws, but it doesn't get rid of any other laws. So laws against trafficking, laws against assault, laws against violence, they all still exist. It's just there are no sex work specific laws. And under decrim, sex work would be treated like any other business. So there would still be laws around like where, for example, a brothel could open. Like there would still be business laws. It's just nothing specific to sex work. So equality. Legalization, which I think a lot of people, including myself, before I was in the industry for very long, think legalization. Oh, yeah, that's the answer. We need legalization. And I understand where they're coming from. But when you kind of pull on that thread, legalization would only work if A, there was no stigma around sex work, and B, policing was applied to everyone equally and fairly and proportionately, which I think, again, from my background, I'm like, yeah, but educating myself, I'm like, that doesn't happen. People won't be policed fairly. So if we have legalization, that is essentially government-controlled sex work. And I don't know about you, but I feel like governments shouldn't be involved in people's sex lives. Like, so if we did have legalization, or bodies, exactly. That's part of the thing. If we're saying my body, my choice, you can't say that and then be like,
except sex workers.
Yeah, not allowed to do sex work. Everything else, yeah. So legalization would mean you would have to register as a sex worker, which for a lot of, sex workers, a large portion of them are mothers. And to register as a sex worker, in theory, that shouldn't change anything, because if it was legal, it would be a legal job. But you would have social services suddenly a lot more interested in what's going on in your life. And there have been cases where social services have given custody of children to men with a recorded past of violence over a mother who is a sex worker with no history of violence. So understandably, under legalization, lots of people in general would not feel safe to register publicly as a sex worker, which would mean they'd have to work in unregistered, illegal brothels and workplaces, which would be obviously incredibly dangerous. At the moment in the UK, we have a kind of like part legalized thing, which is the act of selling sex itself is legal, but soliciting and working together is illegal. So, a lot of the time we'll see statistics about brothels, how many brothel closures. And when you pull on that thread, it's like, no, legally, the definition of a brothel is where two people or more sex workers are working together.
Could be doing a double, which is illegal.
So they'd rather you be working alone and much more dangerously, which is like, this seems like kind of you're trying to trap people and punish them for doing work that is legal. So, decriminalization in New Zealand, they introduced it in, I think, 2003. And now 90% of sex workers there say that they experience more worker rights and they've got more choice when it comes to clients. They can say no. They have more support if something does go wrong from the police. I'm sure it's not perfect, and it's not perfect for migrant sex workers, but it is a start. At the moment in the UK, there are a lot of MPs who are pushing for something called the Nordic Model of criminalisation, which is where the buyer is criminalised. So the sex worker is, on paper, decriminalised, but all their clients are criminalised. So this is peddled as like a feminist method a lot of the time, and is pushed by a lot of feminist groups. But if the sex workers themselves are saying, this makes our lives much more dangerous, please do not introduce this. And you're like, I know better than you. I'm going to introduce this because it's feminist. I don't like men. I think they should be punished. That doesn't feel feminist to me. And what you end up with is the clients who are like the good clients who have something to lose and would be scared of getting caught and criminalized under those laws. They don't come.
And workers being like stalked by police so that they can capture the clients, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And actually all the data, all the studies point towards decriminalization as the answer. People like Amnesty, people like the WHO, people like UN Women, but yet politicians and feminists or who don't want to listen, it's just like, you wonder why when big accredited, like known organizations who are working towards a global good, you know, are completely ignored. It's just really shocking to understand how people don't actually give a shit about safety of a woman.
Yeah.
That they will lord their internalized issues over sexuality and their preference for violence, because it is a preference for violence, even if they don't want to say it, over the reality of keeping people healthy, alive, safe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is such an utterly privileged point of view. It's saying, I don't like the idea that this is happening.
Yeah.
Therefore, anyone doing it, I think, should be punished. Which, if we're living in a world that says that, what else is going to happen? We can't, that's not the world. We can't live like that. And I think if you're saying you're a feminist, accept sex workers, you aren't a feminist. That's not...
You're a feminist for your own, like, small existence.
Yeah.
It's not really thinking about the world.
Yeah.
And the reality. It's like something you're telling yourself.
Yeah.
You're not actually doing anything.
You're living in theoretically, because theoretically they'd like to live in a world where, I would like to live in a world where no one has to do a job they don't want to do. I'd love to live in a world like that. But like, we live in a capitalist patriarchy. The one small silver lining is that like, sex work's very profitable. You know, if you really, really don't want anyone to do sex work, then make sure the housing crisis is sorted out. We're in a cost of living crisis. Like ketchup costs £4. Like, you know, benefit sanctions are happening all the time. Student loans, like there are other things. If you really don't want people to do sex work, you focus on those other things.
The pay
don't
gap.
Punish the people that are doing the things that are the most viable options for them. And if you want to, but if you want to, that's a viable option. I think you should be able to do the work that you want to do. And you don't need to say, oh, well, I had to pay for uni or my mother's cancer treatment. No, it's a job. There are lots of jobs that involve bodies. You don't sell your body. People that say, oh, I'm still here. I'm selling my body. Like, no, slavery is illegal. And again, human slavery, laws exist even under decriminalisation. So no one is saying people should be able to buy human beings. That doesn't exist. Well, it is illegal, and it would remain illegal under decrim.
And so all of these things have kind of come together, and now you have the play that's kind of brought in all of this thought in Molly. Oh, poor Molly. It's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of story. But you have a show that by the time this is aired would have run in London for 2 nights. Yeah. How are you feeling about that?
I'm very nervous.
So you were at the Edinburgh Fringe. How many shows did you do there?
22.
Okay, yeah, we can talk about the exploitation of that at another point.
Well, I mean, that's the other thing. I did a big PR campaign.
Shit, 22.
Yeah. And I did a whole like PR thing about how, like, I sold full nudes on OnlyFans. I made a big thing with my face in, because a lot of the full nude explicit stuff I don't have my face in because I'm terrified of AI and facial recognition. But I made a big thing about I'm doing this, and it was the most expensive thing I've ever sold on OnlyFans. And, you know, exactly how I thought they would. A lot of like tabloid press were like, Skin Star forced to sell nudes. And I was like, first of all, not forced. But I need to raise a couple of tens of £1,000s to take my show to Edinburgh. Again, I didn't have to. No one was like forcing me to. But people will say to people in creative freelance industries, if you want it enough, you'll find the money, you'll find the time, you'll make it work. And I did. But then the same people will say, not that way. No, you have to find it a different way. You have to ask your parents. And it is the whole creative freelance industry. There's that issue. But I raised the money, or like some of the money, to go to the Fringe by selling nudes. And the whole point of that was I'm naked in my show. And there is a moment where I'm fully nude and people are paying to go see that. And people are often naked in theatre, and it's considered like brave and like very committed to the role. And I think it can really be an important device sometimes. But people are okay with that. I was allowed to go on stage for 22 performances and get completely naked and have people pay to see it. They didn't have to admit that's what they were coming to see. But I think people love having this kind of grey area. And that's what that was. There could be a man who came just to see me naked, and that's fine. But you need to pay your ticket fee. But that's a nice area of grey. I think a lot of the reason people don't like sex work is because it can be quite black and white. And it's very clear what I'm getting, what you're getting.
Confronting to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that space feel good for you, the clarity of that space?
Yeah. I felt great every night. I thought I was going to be utterly terrified to be naked on stage. But I've been naked on stage many times in strip clubs. But it felt like it was in a different context. But for me, over the last couple of years since starting OnlyFans and since publicly talking about it, a lot of the work I've done mentally has been, I don't need to have different versions of me. And getting diagnosed with autism was part of that. And being like, I need to stop masking. This is all me. I've done a lot of this on television before. The nudity is very important to that part of the script. And even if it wasn't, whatever. I can be naked on stage if I want to be. But it did feel like, this is mine. I can be naked on stage. This is in what people consider a classy context. So if I can do this here, I'm saying it's fine. I can do it wherever I want, and I can charge what I think it's worth. And people can choose whether they want to pay for it or not. But it was part of like blending all of those aspects of my personality to be like, no, people can be multifaceted. Like, just because you're a sexual being, it doesn't mean you can't be a professional. Like, very much the opposite. You could be a very professional sexual being. Lots of people do it well.
So the diagnosis seems to have moved some things for you?
Yeah. And explained why I was so tired. Because holding up different versions of yourself for different rooms is exhausting, and trying to keep track of who you need to be in each situation. And the freedom of thinking, I'm just going to be who I am, and the people that don't like that, there will be people, will fall aside, and it will require less energy. And the people that like it might even get closer to me, and the things that are meant for me will come. But I spent a decade trying to fit all these different molds, literally, with acting, and not being able to do it. And the second I was like, oh, fuck it, this is who I am, I changed agents because, I am now with a company called Divergent Talent, and they are specifically for people who are neurodivergent. And I feel like I don't have to do this weird social dance with them. They understand how I work. I understand how they work. And I've just been more myself in everything. And part of that was writing the play, because I wouldn't have done that 5 years ago. I would have been like, no, I can't tell people. When I was stripping, I was terrified anyone would find out. Someone would come in and recognize me from the TV show I was in. I was terrified, but that just came from my own internalized shame about sexuality. And as soon as I got the diagnosis, I was like, I'm not pretending anymore. Like, forget it. I'm only going to do it when I'm being paid to do it, and being paid fairly to do it. And it was a huge relief.
A lot of freedom.
Huge freedom.
A lot of freedom from a lot of investigation and education.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's possible for most people?
I would like it to be. I just wish there wasn't so much stigma around sexuality and sex work. I have a friend who's a writer, and she's a brilliant writer, and she started writing erotic stories for a feminist publication. And I was like, how much are they paying you? And she was like, I can't remember how much it was. It was like £100 for a thing. And I was like, oh my God, please start an OnlyFans page, because she was like struggling to pay her rent. And I was like, start an OnlyFans page, just post your erotica. You will be paid fairly, and what you decide is fair. Trust me, you will do it. And she has just because of the stigma associated with the name OnlyFans or sex work in general, she was like, I can't, I'll never get like a professional writing gig again. And I was like, sadly, I can't guarantee, maybe there will be some people that close the doors, but maybe the doors that close when you talk about sex work and being sexual, you probably don't really need to go in those rooms.
It's interesting how the word like erotica in written form can be something that's acceptable. But as soon as we involve our being and our image. Yeah. I think it's been, I think sex work has been very educational for me. When I first started it, it was just so I could pay my rent. But it's the process of going through experiencing the stigma at a dining table, to thinking about why can't I do another financial payment processor, and now they've gone bankrupt and I've lost 80% of my earnings and there was no other option. It's just been like coming up against wall after wall after wall and people like saying and thinking things. It's been an unfortunate way to learn the limitations of society and how small-minded most people are and how afraid they are to just open their eyes a little bit to something that they are not really knowing or confronted by. People are fucking terrified.
They're terrified, but they are fascinated. Like anything, sex sells. How many TV shows and films have we got with like stereotypical characters of sex workers that are obviously written by men who've never met a sex worker? But I'm like, people are fascinated. They love like appropriating sex worker culture. But as soon as it comes to having a sex worker involved, they get weird. And like I had a play that I was developing before Really Good Exposure, and the producer that I had back in the day, I was saying to him, I don't have experience of all types of sex work. So, in this, we're talking about a different type of sex work that I don't have experience in. So I would like to pay to a couple of sex workers for consultancy fees. And he was like, oh, I don't know. That feels like weird to me. That feels like exploitative. And I was like, it feels more exploitative than asking them to sit and tell me their life story for free. Absolutely. I'm not going to do that. Wow. But it's very weird how people get so like, oh no, we can't like pay them for that. I'm like, no. You absolutely have to pay people for their labor and their research.
And also specifically those people who actually know. Don't just make shit up. I
had a writing job, the other day, and it was just so clear. It was so clear that they had not even researched, even the bare minimum research about sex work. And I was like, You're lucky I'm in this room. I have only a very privileged experience with sex work, but if you are going to talk about all these different types of sex work, you absolutely have to do more research and involve sex workers, pay sex workers.
There's
there are
a lot of
sex worker writers.
Exactly.
There's enough. There's lots, right?
Yeah.
But you think you know better, and your show is going to suffer. Like people will watch this and it won't vibe with them. They will feel the like
falseness.
It's and we've seen that. I don't want to see another terribly inaccurate show about sex work. Like that's been done to death. Like we don't need to see it. But for some reason, we have this like inability to be like, you know what? I should hire someone with experience of the industry. Why? It's so weird. People, and it obviously comes from our like puritanical like roots, but it's so weird how deeply, deeply ingrained those are, even now when we think we've come so far.
And how much people just don't want to question.
No. Yeah, because I think you're right. As soon as you start pulling at a thread, if you start thinking, my marriage is a little bit transactional, like, we had this agreement that, I'm going to look after the kids and then he's going to make the money.
What does that say about me? Does that mean I'm this kind of person?
Yeah.
It's like, yes, you are a little bit, but you're not only, but we're not even ready to ask that of ourselves.
There's a very vocal anti-sex work feminist who is very against sex work, but she doesn't work. Her husband pays for everything, and she is. I think you absolutely be a housewife if that's what you want. I think women should have just as much right to do that as to do sex work, as to be CEOs. But
Acknowledge.
it's a transactional relationship, and it's working well. But we're the same, babe. Like it's just. It's
and I
sad.
have more freedom.
Yeah,
I don't have to see them every day.
Yeah. We're not tied into like a long-term contract.
Breathe their air forever. Like my own air. But you have the show coming up. You've just finished a short film.
Yes. We finished filming it yesterday.
Congrats.
So we're doing post-production of that next. But I've also got my podcast, which is also called Really Good Exposure.
Oh, good.
So that's coming out in end of January, February, March.
Okay.
So I'll be posting on that. But I would love to have you on the next series
thank
as well.
you.
Yeah, it's a shame I didn't meet you before.
Oh, good.
You'll be amazing.
Thank you. Is it an interview podcast?
So it's essentially it's me with a lot of. So far it has all been women, but women that I know who do all different types of work, and asking them about like life lessons they've learned through their work and like what advice they can give so that other people don't have to learn the hard way.
They will have to anyway.
Yeah.
Nobody listens.
No, you have to learn the hard way. But the idea being like there are parallels with the issues that women face in the workforce in general, in society. And I'm speaking to some sex workers on there. I speak about my own experience in sex work, and I just would like for it to highlight that, there are issues that women face, but sex work isn't the cause. It's not. It's patriarchy and capitalism.
Every job is an outcome of those wondrous, overbearing lords. But question everything, basically.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been so nice.
You've been so busy, and I hope that it's all fulfilling. And I'm very grateful that you're speaking for us also.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
That was so fun.